Tell us who you are and where you're at.
Hi, I'm Josh Nyback with Nyback Builds, and we built the studio here, Bergatron Music in North Hollywood, California. I'm gonna show you guys around. So as we enter, this is the live room, and this is the control room. So my role in this build was consulting from the beginning about the construction. We didn't actually do any of the structural build. It was permitted ADU. What I did is I consulted on the methods for soundproofing and the shapes of the room and worked with Brian to figure out what was going to be the best use of the space and the footprint that he was going to build out. The intent was to be able to record live bands and then also be able to mix in the control room, but also making it aesthetically beautiful so that it's a great spot to film. I'm really pleased with this hybrid space being usable on so many different fronts. So the soundproofing in the live room was room within a room on all the walls. So we framed a secondary set of walls on the wall mat system. The ceiling is Isomax clips and hat channel. And then in the control room is all Isomax clips, hat channel as well. And then the layers that we added were plywood, green glue, drywall, 5/8 Firex, green glue, drywall, and finished it out. Acoustical sealant in all the joints and inside corners, so no air will escape. With the limitations of the weight on the ceiling though, we had to do 1/2 inch OSB and 1/2 inch drywall. But this is an A-frame gimbal roof, so there is a huge air gap between that. So that's also super helpful, just that space in between another barrier, you know?
Tell us about all the layers and why it was important to use different materials.
With using plywood, it's another layer of mass and you have alternating densities, which is just great for any sort of, for the whole frequency spectrum. When it hits a surface, if you have 4 layers of drywall, it's still going to allow certain frequencies to pass through because it will resonate at that. So if you have different densities of material stacked together, you're going to get better results, period. But with the plywood, we were able to screw anywhere without having to make big holes. That's always just a go-to and very helpful on the finishes.
Josh, what do you want to say to all the people that say green glue doesn't work?
Whether it's monetarily most beneficial, I think there's a couple factors that makes green glue a worthwhile product to use in different scenarios. But what the green glue does, once it cures, it dampens the drywall. So if you were to take a sheet of 5/8 drywall and knock it, there's like a frequency, there's a note that you can hear. What the green glue does is it deadens all that so that it really only is resonating at those low frequencies. So it mechanically chills it out, is the best way I can put it, and really binds the two materials so that you have a more solidified mass that you are putting up as a barrier. There are some other ways to go about it, but if you want really good, reliable results, you got to use the products that, you know, are designed for that function. I don't exclusively use green glue. Some builds we don't use it for one reason or another. So does it work? Yes. The one thing we didn't do for budgetary reasons was float the floor. We used a noise dampening compound with a cork mat and the noise dampening compound. So similar to green glue, but designed for isolating glue down flooring, and then laid the flooring down. For budgetary reasons, floating the floor, elevations change. Like, it's a whole complicated thing, really messing with the floor, but we weren't too worried about the bleed with that because his slab is isolated from his neighbors. It is really difficult to build secondary isolated window frames off of your superstructure windows. So on the outside, we just used a typical residential style window with a glass upgrade. And the glass upgrade is 2 different thicknesses of panes of glass. Milgard, what is it? The C Ultra 600 series? Like a nice rigid fiberglass frame, and I can't remember the lamination stack, but you'll put it up there. And then we did 3/4 inch laminated glass on the inside. Also, when you order your laminated glass, make sure they're 2 different thicknesses. You don't want sympathetic frequencies transmitting across. Because we had a secondary framing, we were able to frame this window frame independent of the outside framing and the outside frames. So it's touching and coupled by a little bit of neoprene, but aside from that, it is a window frame on this wall, and on the outside is a sealed window on that wall. So over here is an isolated outlet, which we also alternated with some dirty ones, if you can see. What notates that it's isolated is a orange triangle. The way that these receptacles are designed is that your tabs that you fasten to a metal box that will ground it is disconnected from this ground. So in theory, you need your hot, your neutral, your common ground, and then an isolated ground. All the isolated grounds have a home run to the isolated bus bar that then takes an insulated wire that goes all the way to the earth by itself, independent of what the sub panel is bouncing off and then being grounded by the copper pipes in the structure or another ground rod. That eliminates any sort of ground interference from any of the mechanical stuff that, like air conditioners or mini fridges or anything like that. The studio sub panel is a sub of a sub, right? And so all your mechanicals on that breaker. You have two legs going, and we just kept all of the audio circuits and grounds and neutrals in that separate sub panel. And then it has its own independent isolated ground that does not ground or have continuity between the ground of the rest of the house. When you plug in audio, you know it doesn't have any interference. All the grounds don't turn into a big antenna.
And the purpose of leaving dirty outlets.
Yeah, so I mean, you still need functions of, you know, if you need a space heater, I don't know, if a camera crew and have lights that need to be plugged in. All the lighting circuits too are on a whole different circuit, and ground is common ground, and then the isolated ground is isolated. So you just have zero interference. Any light switch that was mounted on the drywall, we surface mounted our electrical boxes so that we can penetrate the wall with a tiny little hole, be it Romex or armored cable, and then seal that up nice and easy instead of having a big 4x4 hole that you have to putty and add layers behind in order to compensate for the loss of mass. So wherever that was, we just framed them out. Another thing about the bunker traps too is that you can extrude all the electrical and audio wires and install them flush with the same concept that you're just penetrating in a couple places with, you know, a nickel size hole as opposed to a 4-inch by 4-inch hole every single spot. So the lighting, we have everything on a hue system. When people want to start having some light features, and we do strip lighting and have it dimmable and maybe flexible so you can turn certain things on. So you don't have 20 switches on a wall. You got to go smart home. It's the easiest way to do it. The Philip Hue system, I haven't had any issues with buzzing or any sort of interference even when they're close to audio. We always do try to keep them away, and if audio's running, we try to, you can cross perpendicular with lines, but you don't want to run them parallel because of the electrical magnetic interference. But the great thing about the Hue stuff is that you can control every individual light. So color, it gives you not only RGB, but it gives you cool white and warm white. So you can get the coolest hues. And like if you come over here, just like the indirect glowing that you can get just by indirectly lighting, spotlights, I mean, it's just so cool and so flexible. And then, you know, we still have analog on and off switches just in case, for, you know, for the old school users, but you can have it on your iPhone or your iPad. We also use like a really nice strip light and then use a third-party controller that runs Zigbee, which is the script that Hue uses. Keep things open source. The original design with this spot was keeping this the control room, and what we were gonna do was do a double slider ISO booth in here, and then it's still having line of sight with the live room in here. And that was kind of always the original vision, is being able to have a true line of sight and having the open floor plan. But then we were gonna have a really, really small room. So what we decided to do is open the room up more. When we nixed this area here as a booth to widen this control room more, we still needed to have a double door system. And so the airlock is basically a framed out room. We didn't do any clipping or anything like that because it was attached to this room. So we didn't want to do more than it needed to have. Double layer drywall with green glue. So it could have been smaller so that there's a 2-leaf system, but we brought it all the way out here so that we could conceal this slider. And we'll talk about that in a second. And mass loaded this door with double seals. So what we did is just took a fire rated solid core door and added 3/4 inch MDF with You can't see it because it's painted over, but there's a layer of dead sheet, which is similar to mass loaded vinyl, 1 pound per square foot. And then we have a step seal here, which this has a threshold with a rabbeted neoprene gasket here, and then a mechanical stop that when this door closes, a drop goes down and seals up against this. This door seals up against this neoprene gasket, and then this seals up against this secondary stop here. The idea is adding a lot of mass and making sure air doesn't seep through, because that's just how sound travels. Another problem we had was trying to figure out how to get the audio from the back of the desk over here into this room. And we couldn't go through the slider, so we had to go up and above. It's a little longer run, but we went up and did a drop ceiling with absorption up here, just so that any energy that travels in here at least will be dissipated by a soft ceiling up here. So the cable run that runs into this bass trap goes up over the airlock and pops out here. So we're still inside of this envelope. It goes all the way through, and then we have a pass through. So the runs, anything that would be added, just clipped in there. And then we actually have a breach into this room here. So it can all be accessed and brought in. Pokes through down here. And then as a pull point, having access and being able to pull this out and run the cables through that. Up into the bunker trap and do all your drops and runs and what have you. This is something I picked up from some George Osberger plans years ago, where it's just, you know, a low-mid trap stuffed. We have it with pegboard so that it is not particularly reflective in the high end, but still does some low-mid trapping. We finished it out with some rattan and some fabric back there. But all the lids are basically a cable trough that we can run around. So we only had to have one penetration in the room in order to get all the cabling from the control room into the live room. And the lids are removable. And you can access all the wiring, add, replace, fix, slide back in.
Tell us more about this slider and how you got it to seal.
These sliders, these are soundproof sliders. It's 5/8 laminated glass, 1 pane. And it's a tight friction fit top and bottom. And so this frame actually continues all the way over here. There's a glass panel that's behind this that just doesn't move. It's a fixed panel. And then these 3 preceding ones all latch on. So it's technically a 4-panel door. You just don't see the 4th panel. In case you guys are curious on how to do a pocket slider, you don't have to get all crazy, just bury a panel. Just make sure you have access on it. Also, this panel is removable for servicing in case there's any issues. We could take this apart. This whole thing can be disassembled, service it, and fix what we need. We basically stuffed it with insulation as well so that it's not just a void cavity that would resonate. And just figured it was a beautiful panel that would be useful for storage. So we did these with 1-inch dowels that are removable and can be moved and store all kinds of stuff.
My cable wall.
This is a really cool feature. Brian asked to have a place to hold all his mic stands and just continued the bunker trap out, and no need for a lid because they were either going to stand up or lay down. And always when we're doing acoustic stuff, we're trying to give at least 2 purposes to what we're putting in there. So obviously the acoustic, and then some sort of function, be it aesthetic and design, or be it lighting, be it storage. This design, you know, was a lot of back and forth with Brian, finding the colors, finding the woods that he liked, and knowing that we had to have some sort of corner traps, and having this stepped out so that we can get some depth on the wall without eating up too much of the room. When we were going back and forth on designing this money wall, you were pushing me more and more to be, what did you say?
Do something so radical you would think I'd fire you for.
And I mean, I think that's always a good encouraging statement. If you're comfortable and if it feels safe, then you're not growing. When we were looking for creative inspiration, I mean, we were just thumbing through Pinterest, and we had a board that we were sharing with each other and finding stuff that obviously resonated with Brian.
A lot of restaurants.
Yeah, restaurants, living rooms. Like, it didn't have to be music studios, because if you go down that rabbit hole, then they just all kind of refine down to the same thing. So,
do you remember one of the studios that I put on my Pinterest board was the studio you just finished, Swan Dive?
Oh, right, yeah.
I didn't even know you guys built that, but I had that on my Pinterest board.
Brian is an amazing artist, illustrator. So we mocked a few things up and it kept evolving to the point till we got to the spot.
Talk about the mixed materials and like going from the fabric to the Roman clay to the diffusers and the efforts we made to keep this room live.
I was concerned, it being a live room, that it would be too absorbent if this was just soft absorption, velocity absorption, just fiberglass basically. So what we did on the framing that is supporting all this is we tapered with more pegboard in triangles that basically sawtooth to still reflect some of that high end and keep it floating around in the room while also still absorbing, you know, the frequencies that would really build up and excite the room, the modes, room modes, and the frequencies higher on the harmonic series of that. So this wood diffuser is the same as the ones on the ceiling. They're diffusing around 2000 hertz and up, just so that with the glass right there on the parallel side, we didn't splay any of the walls because we really just wanted to maximize as much square footage as we could and figured we could do it with diffusion. But they're prime 7. Diffusion just helps scatter the frequencies evenly so they just can be a little bit more pleasant and not have comb filtering and just break up any sort of flutter, which is that ping-pongy sound you get when you clap. I mean, I think we had a really good balance, making sure we didn't over-absorb with enough diffusion and then even some low-mid stuff. We didn't do any low-bass absorption, you know. I mean, I haven't heard any low-end frequencies that are building up, but I'm sure there's optimal places in this room. We nailed it.
Nailed it.
You know, the collaboration with Brian was awesome to be able to know that we were going to push it more until we found something that worked. And it was really easy for you to communicate your visions too via
the Paint app.
The Paint app. So the clouds in the live room, we had an issue, which we knew we would anticipate, especially when you start putting absorption on the sides, you really kind of hear the vulnerable spots. This was the last thing we added to the room just because we wanted to make sure we got it right, was that these reflections here were making a comb filtering. So you stood right here and clapped. It was all the pingy, like all the stuff you don't want to hear, right? Because you just picture all the energy coming, reflecting right back at you at this, maybe out of phase a little here, comb filtering and all that. So we still didn't want to just absorb it and it not be as live. So we tried this cool design where we used some random hole acoustic ceiling tiles and some absorption still. So this is, you know, 0.98, whatever, Orange Corning absorbs everything up to a certain low frequency. These, the NRC, which is basically the coefficient of like how much absorption there is about, I don't know, it's like 0.55 to 0.65. So basically 50-60% absorption from these, but it throws back a little bit. And then the diffusers, they're just 1.5 inches wide, and well depth was like 2 inches just because we wanted to keep it all on the same plane. So it's throwing back and diffusing at about 2000 hertz to 4500, something like that. And it got rid of that flutter that we were worried about and looked cool. But I think it looks rad.
And so Josh, I noticed they're different. Each one of these is different.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, so what we wanted to do is just alternate, mirror it. You know, really, because I didn't want to have too much absorption, we limited the panels and just kind of flipped the algorithm, which is just a grid. There's more diffusion on this side and just kind of breaking it up so it just felt a little less symmetrical, but didn't sound bad. The cloud design, you know, we started playing with some curved objects and really liked the idea of just having something a little different than what we've done in the past, you know, with our builds and designs. It's offset from the ceiling, so it's 4 inches of insulation, and we even stuffed a bit higher where we put a fascia so it just throws light so you can't really see. Yeah, it's just to help the listening position, to tame the reflections and try to calm some of that 60 hertz.
That's what I was going to ask, is what's the main frequency function of the cloud?
Yeah, I mean, the cloud is still basically a broadband absorber, and, you know, realistically, it's not trapping the lower frequencies and probably doesn't get lower than, you know, 250 hertz. But the harmonics of that, I mean, you definitely need absorption above your listening position for those first order reflections that come from your monitors so that you're getting the signal from your speakers to the point that you're listening. I mean, this room is a little more difficult to predict just because of the geometry with the bathroom and the airlock and the sliders and all that stuff. So we had to shoot it to really see what we were up against. Like, there was no treatment in this room except for some absorption on the sides. We had the speakers set up. We were still under construction, and so over the weekends, Brian would shoot in the room. We would look at the analytics on REW and see where the room modes were and seeing how well they lined up with what we were predicting, which is always a good control to see so that your math is consistent, or if there's something that you're not factoring in. REW has a really cool predictive placement where you can move stuff around and see where those modes and nulls will be. And again, it's in an ideal, perfect environment. It did help us figure out where a good spot or a good direction to go in. For those lower frequencies, we built in some membrane traps, embedded them in the back wall, and then we installed some back here to just tame that energy that for the axial modes of the up and down.
And in the gobos too.
Right, the gobos, yeah. So we made some membrane traps that are basically from this point down that were targeted for the axial modes for this room. I do remember it was like, this is 24 feet long from the hard surface to hard surface, and it was like 28 hertz or something. It was something that was just raging. It was super, super wild because we'd bump a sine wave at that frequency, and you go stand in the back of the room and you just feel your innards just, those speakers are awesome to be able to pump down that low. So obviously that room mode times that by 2 in the next octave up, like there was just a whole lot of amplification in certain parts of the room and then cancellation. So we were trying to figure out how to knock down this axial, and we realized that the width of this room is pretty similar to the height of this room. In the back wall, we tried some heavier gauge steel diaphragmatic traps, but the more rigid the material is by adding mass, the more it tunes up. So you almost have to compensate by adding more mass to it so it can really get going. So what we ended up deciding is bailing on the sheet metal, because we were using a really thick gauge. We switched to a limp mass trap. And the whole concept is it's an airtight box that's mounted on the back of the drywall. And then you put a membrane or a diaphragm. These are diaphragmatic. And being able to get the mass just right so that it resonates at that pitch, and the insulation inside, it has a spring dampening effect. So when the material is vibrating at that frequency, the depth of it will cancel out the energy and generate the sound energy into heat. Basically, that's any sort of dissipation of or transference of energy when you're absorbing or attenuating anything in acoustics. Even the little fibers in your 703 is turning into heat, and that's how this whole thing works. And sure enough, we shot the room with all the traps, these in here and the ones in the gobos, and we got really good results. Not to mention throughout the whole room, like it sounds really, really good. These racks we designed, it was a play off of a design we did for another client. His name's Josh Block, and my name is Josh, and they look like a block. So we called them the Josh Blocks. You needed them at a certain elevation, and yeah, it's just like monolithic, super robust, white oak, beautiful boxes that you can have and stay out of the way of any sort of audio coming out your speakers and not create interference.
Do you remember the angle you put them at?
Yeah, they're 15 degrees, which is pretty typical for studio ergonomics and reflections. Like any sort of reflection that you're trying to deviate from coming right back at you, 15 degrees is usually a really good place to start.